And my brother is here. My friend is here. My helper is here. What else? Who else is here? I'm
Manish Akwal, Meenal, Piyush Malik, who's my cousin, Rajiv.
Yes.
Lovely to have all of you guys. Really humbled by the response because there were unprecedented number of registration. Thank you very much, everyone. All right, so we begin. Welcome, everyone. Conscious leadership. Delighted to have with me on this panel three people whom I truly, truly cherish and have been on a journey with for several years now. We will discover in an interactive session. So as we go along, please feel free to keep entering your questions so that I can invite you to also interact with the panel. This is not a one-way thing that we are going to do with them. What I'm going to do is first, from context of conscious leadership, begin to understand what that means for in perspective experience with our panel members, and then we'll get into certain deep dive into elements of it. So first of all, let me start with the first panel member, Dinesh. Dinesh is in San Jose, but today he is in my home here in Hyderabad. And we had a very beautiful gathering of conscious leaders in the afternoon at ISB. Dinesh has had an amazing journey, having moved to the US in 1969, stayed in Florida for nearly 30 years, then come to India for about 3 years, where he worked with Aisha, and amazing things that then he did with many other companies. And then, after 3 years, when he went back, he has been in California. So, Dinesh, I'll start with you. What does conscious leadership mean for you?
Thank you, Anil, for since last evening we have met. It has been a non-stop dialogue and fun and delightful dinner at your home. So I deeply appreciate and grateful. Conscious leadership, wonderful subject. And first, let me start with consciousness. What we mean by that and what I have come to understand, it is an experience which can't be described. And the experience of being in the present moment, experience of being in the now, experience any way you want to call it. Gulzar Sahab would call it, Noor ki boond hai sadiyon se baha karti hai. Javed Sahab would call it, Samay ka ye pal tham sa gaya hai. So it is an experience and we can't describe it. So how can anyone access that experience? And at its peak, anyone who connects also experiences that. So a leader, a conscious leader, masters that and he begins to live in that flow. And as he connects with other people and they connect with him, he all brings them to that place. And right now, all the people who are on this call, if we are all open, then we can all connect. We can get there in this place now.
Thank you so much, Dinesh, for bringing us in the here and now. I next want to bring in our panelist, Dr. Prasad Kaipa, very eminent in the field. Over 40 plus years he has been in San Jose, and he has done amazing work in the space of Vedantic leadership. I've learned a lot from him in the years I have known him. He's been a visiting faculty in ISP here. He has written books like on wise leadership and many other books. And whenever I speak to him, he's able to put the big picture perspective so beautifully. So Prasad, my question to you would be, what can you say about conscious leadership which ChatGPT cannot?
Okay. Well, ChatGPT is not conscious. I am. What does that mean? ChatGPT does a lot of mistakes, and I do too, except that I learned from my mistakes without any external intervention. I am aware, and many times I am aware that I am aware. That's what makes me conscious. And of course, there are moments of lack of awareness, and I become aware. So there is a gap in terms of whether I'm with you, whether I'm present, whether I'm paying attention, whether I'm not paying attention. But those are some things I can observe without any external device, without any external recognition or memory. And ChatGPT collects what it knows and identifies the patterns and puts them into some kind of a linguistic framework or a language or a story or a poem for people to understand. I cannot do any of them as well as ChatGPT does, except that I believe my clumsiness, my vulnerability, my willingness to learn, and for long periods of time, I might not know. I might actually struggle. And I operate with my struggle and not knowing for much longer period than ChatGPT ever does. So the artificial intelligence probably is superior in terms of intellect. But if you take even a biological intelligence, like if you take amoeba, or if you take some of the type of things, they have some things, which is the consciousness and awareness, depending on the spectrum, biological spectrum, where they are, they have higher or lower consciousness than what ChatGPT has. Whereas when we talk about human beings, I think we operate in a completely different domain than any artificial intelligent agents like ChatGPT or Bard or whatever other machines or whatever other things that can come about. And we think ethically. We have our own set of principles by which not only we operate, we try to teach it to our kids, and we try to practice that. We try to feel that. We try to empathize that and be compassionate. None of them ChatGPT can do. So to summarize, I would say consciousness has a lot more to do with empathy, compassion, connection, and a certain bond that may not be always visible, but that is the foundation and the fountain from which our intelligence flourishes. None of this at this moment ChatGPT has got. So I believe consciousness leadership is distinct and different and in a completely different plane when compared to anything that any AI of today, even though that is no question, it's a transformational leap when compared to anything else. It is starting a whole new chapter with ChatGPT, I understand, but it is not a consciousness.
Thank you, Prasad. I'm sure we'll come back and Dots will get connected as we go along. Our next panel member is Raghu, someone I've worked with for the longest period now. So Raghu, for me, has been an amazing mix of yoga that he did directly with Krishnacharya and Desikacharya tradition, and then with process work that he did with Cullen Garg, and then the kind of leadership work he has done is amazing. And some of the work that I have done with him personally, I have learned in my journey how to really look at my own psychodramas and go within. So delighted to have Raghu here and the Indic wisdom he truly embodies, that I've seen him embody. So Raghu, my question to you is, from the Indic perspective, what practices will enable a leader to become more conscious?
Yeah, first of all, I must thank Dinesh and Prasad. Yeah, Dinesh has, as usual, set out a nice question for all of us. Can we be connected in the here and now? Right? And Prasad has brought in some very interesting words like vulnerability and so on. I think the first practice, which is very critical, is vulnerability and openness. Right? And this chat GPT thing has also been, in my mind for some time, because lots of people around me are sending me long passages. This is what chat GPT said and didn't say. And I'm just reminded when looking at chat GPT of a small experience that I had once. Yeah. And for some reason that's been coming back to me last couple of days. I was walking down Bangalore once, right? And those beautiful trees on either side, but the roads are so crowded, noisy, full of stone pavings and all that, right? And I was kind of, in this, horns and alarm signals all around. And as I'm walking around, I see one little plant that's come out between those rock pavings, the beautiful, beautiful blue color flower out there. Now, this kind of growth and this kind of sensitivity can only happen in a space which has got vulnerability, which has got empathy, which has got life flowing, which has got prana. And we also have those parts of us. Now, there are parts of us that are encrusted, and which will be like, like ChatGPT. You ask me a question, I've got all this information, I'll put it together using my intellect and I'll give you an answer. Right? And that's like, I think Prasad would call that smart, being very smart. Yeah. There's another part of me which is live, which is vulnerable, which can feel human suffering, which can understand other people's suffering and so on. Right? Now, keeping that part alive is the central practice for a leader who wishes to be conscious. Right? And this kind of practice, I think, will go far beyond just some meditation and feel good in the morning and go out there and work. It requires a lot of self-reflectivity. Yeah. So if you go into some of the Indic texts, they would ask a leader to be a person who's a yogi. Because when you look at Artha Shastra, when you look at Vastu Shastra, Bharata Shastra, they all say that if a person has to be a master, he has to be a yogi. Right? And there they're talking a lot about all the internal practices, starting from how careful you are with food, how you are with your relationships, how you are in your own internal behavior, how observant, like Prasad was saying, aware, how aware you are of everything going on. So there are a host of practices there. Yeah, so in 5 minutes, you can't talk about all these practices, but the main thing is these are not the everyday yoga of bending forward and touching your toes. This is an inner yoga. This is self-reflective, what in yoga is called Antaranga yoga. Right? So you go in and discover, and it's a never-ending process. It's not something that stops one day.
Thank you. Thank you. So with that context set, now this is a question to the panel, and in any order, one could take it up. What has been the key turning point in your own life journeys in this inward movement that Raghu so beautifully described? In this consciousness movement, which can then get into any action space, including leadership.
I can take that if you like. almost 35 years ago, I was working in Apple. Our job was to develop artificial intelligence. Of course, 35 years ago in Apple or anywhere else in the world, the hardware, the bandwidth, the technology or networking capabilities, none of them were where we are. So instead of calling it artificial intelligence, we called it intelligent agents that we should develop. Okay. And one of the early works that some of you can still look at, if you go to YouTube and type knowledge navigator, you will see some early development that Apple was doing in 1987, 88. Some of my colleagues have been deeply engaged with. So we thought, you know what, we need to develop a learning processor, because ultimately human beings can learn and unlearn and relearn, whereas technology cannot. But technology can be a phenomenal enabler for us to learn and unlearn and do whatever other things. And we also looked at it and saying, the first thing which we need to do as an artificial intelligent, if we are going to be a company that will help people to do, learning is what we put in. So we said, maybe we need to do something on the output. It is not, if learning is what we breathe in, what do we breathe out? We said, maybe creativity, maybe leadership, maybe collaboration, maybe there is a lot more connection, better communication. We can do all that. So first we thought, okay, I'm going to study the brain. So I spent a large amount of time spending in the, research labs, operating theaters, interviewing Nobel laureates, interviewing brain researchers. But of course, 35 years ago, the brain was, only way you could study the brain is if somebody has a tumor, they get surgery, they get operated, then they open up the brain and then they look at what's going on in the brain. Because there was no such thing as whatever we have, EEG and the non-invasive techniques and fMRI and all of that. So I spent time with that, and I spent time with extraordinary experts, and I became very arrogant. Maybe it is the Apple that made me arrogant, being in the company that I was, where we think only in superlatives, or maybe it is my personality that attracted me to Apple, because I'm arrogant by nature. And both of them. I went to India, 1989, in September in Goa. There was a conference. And within 2 days, it became extraordinarily clear that it didn't matter that I interviewed 17 Nobel laureates. I interviewed 200 extraordinary people. I knew more about somehow the brain and how it works and how actually the brain functions and how is it connected with learning than probably 99% of the human beings on the planet, including the neuroscientists. But some of the questions that other people asked, I realized I was nothing and I was nobody. And I didn't even know how to constitute a right question. And I sat in that context for several days with other people, but they didn't look down on me. They didn't make fun of me. They embraced me. And we actually spent for 5 days, like, Anil Sachdev, which Dinesh and I know, and several of you probably know. And there are multiple people, Anne Stadler. There are people like T.V. Rao, who is well known in India, and several of us, Sudhanshu Palsule. They're all good friends of mine even now. What we sat down and explored at the end of 5 days, first thing which I did within 2 months was resign from Apple, because I realized I was asking some things. I didn't even know how to formulate right questions. And what I became conscious at that time was that I was not really conscious. I was a pattern matching. I was very intelligent, but what I meant was I had a lot of intellect that was well tuned. When I went to United States, I had the same intellect and intelligence in India. I was nobody in India. But when I went to a United States where there was a certain structure, where there was a certain process, where there was certain things, suddenly I blossomed into one of, considered to be a smart guys, intelligent guys. It was the context and other people that made me who I was. I'm still the same. But in one context, I shine, another context, I don't. And how much am I adding to that context? And that led me for the next 35 years, inquiry into nature of learning, nature of leadership, nature of collaboration. And I'm still learning. I'm still taking baby steps. But the difference between 35 years then and now is that I'm conscious that I'm taking baby steps. And I'm happy that I'm taking some of the steps. At that time, I was upset. I was angry that I was looking for recognition. I was looking for approval. I thought I knew a lot. And when people actually showed me that what I knew was empty and meaningless, I was really upset. So I was not even paying attention to what it is. So for me, that was the experience, one experience that turned my life completely around and got me onto a journey for 35 years where I still cherish and love and learn from each one of you. I think that is a turning point for me.
Wow. It's so beautiful how vulnerably you have shared, as well as I mean, I could walk the journey with you as you were sharing, Prasad. Thank you.
You go next, Dinesh.
No, go ahead, Raghu.
Okay. Your question was, which was my turning point, nah? Anil?
Yes.
Now, I was so lost in what Prasad was saying, I forgot your question, yeah. See, I've been through a couple of turning points, but when you asked the question, the first thing that struck me was actually a very simple experience. Yeah, I'd finished IIT, completed IIT, and started working in a factory. And I would go in there with all my knowledge, and we had a very interesting foreman. Shortish guy called Dorai with a long beard. And when I was talking about machines, this, that, and the other, he would often look at me and say, in Tamil, it sounds very interesting. He'd say, Seema Padipu Pachta Vandetta Onume Puriyala. Seema Padipu means some Western thing you've learned, engineering, you actually don't know anything. Because I would tell him how to make a casting. And he'll say, this drawing, the metal will not flow. Right? So initially I said, no, this is the way the design is. Let me see. Sure enough, it won't flow there. It will form, those fault lines, whatever. Right? And then when I sat with him, he told me, I can feel how the metal will flow inside the mold. Why don't you ask me? So after that, I would sit with him, take a sketch, and he would say, no, this won't work, do this here, and it would flow perfectly. Right, so what hit me at that time was the whole difference between embodied understanding of something. Right, he had mastery over engineering. I had just got an MS in engineering. That's a huge difference, right? And then, there were several. So after that, I would sit with them and, listen to them. And he would tell me stories of how he learned, right? How as a child, they would go, they belonged to what's called a Karmar family. They would go from place to place. He would do the bellows, how he learned, and the whole thing. Right. And then there were life experiences that hit me where I went from what I thought was a secure context, into a terribly difficult context. Right. So what these things do to you is, first of all, it makes you extremely humble. And there is no way you can bluff to yourself about your vulnerability. Right. And I also think that, when one does that, I think that first foreman of mine was a great teacher for me, because he would teach me lots of things about management. And he would tell me, unless you're a good mudalali, which means unless you're a good leader, I cannot be a good toilali, which means I cannot be a good foreman. So learn this. Right. And then I met some great teachers, because when I hit this, real bottom scene in my life, I think some part of me was open, and it really required for me to listen to people. Right. So, and I had this, great fortune of meeting J. Krishnamurti and so on. And I think, I've never stopped inviting life openly in spite of whatever happened. So I keep meeting enormously, fantastic people. I love to sit in front of them, ask them a question, and just listen. And right, it's a delightful journey. Yeah. And I think a lot of deep wounds of mine I've healed by just listening to people. Yeah, to myself and others. So I think every day there's a possibility of a turning point, no? When you get up and think some little blade of grass comes up and tells you, hey man, take a look at me. Right? So it's been a constant journey, like Prasad said, no? And I also think you can only take one step. If you take that step well, it shows you the next step. If you take that step and get stuck and thinking that I know, that's where it ends.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Raghu. For me, that first step came when I heard the question, how have I contributed to where I find myself? And it was such a simple question, and yet it kind of totally threw me into reflection. And I think in addition to that, the second part, even if you are contributing 1% and the other person is contributing 99%, by focusing on that 1%, there is something you can do. Something you can do about that 1% rather than worrying about that 99%, which you can't do much about. That was the major turning point in my life, because I became aware that I no longer have to really focus on where I need my focus. And slowly, it took many years, resistance. And it's funny because I've spent my life in change and organizational change. But I find that change is not easy for me. It takes me a long time and sometimes a sledgehammer. It is getting now a little better after several iterations, but that was my turning point to answer your question.
Wow, thank you. I'm also evoked to share my own turning point. I think the key one was when I was nearing 40. And at that time, I was heading a large multinational in India. And I decided to jump off the cliff and say, okay, let me reinvent myself and go do a startup. And the person with whom I co-founded, he passed away with a heart attack at the age of 50 while I was on a trip to Melbourne. And I came back and I was in this zone of, I actually want to reinvent myself, but I don't know what this means. Yes, there was a startup, that idea, but I just took the plunge. And like everyone who does that, thought, let me give it 3 years and we'll figure out. Now it's been 15 years. And very interestingly, just as through a very series of synchronous things, I got into coaching and facilitation for top leaders. Just when I thought now it's all set, last year, the next major turning point came where I felt, hey, I'm falling into the abyss. And this time the life pushed me there to truly re-examine what is it that I have disowned, that I have not really embraced in my life, and that shifted me. So I think if I was to name these two turning points, one at 40 and one at 54, are the two major turning points that have happened for me. And that actually brings me to a very interesting question for Raghu. Raghu, I've actually done a lot of work with you around Mahabharata immersion and how you use the archetypes. And I'm very curious to know from you, what is dharmic leadership? How does it really, how does one, and what is the idea of dharma and consciousness in this context, and how do they connect? And using the Indic philosophy and Indic methods, how does one actually go about seeing it from this lens that you choose to take of Mahabharata?
Okay, you're asking difficult questions, yeah? And you want a quick answer. So let me try, yeah? See, there are a couple of preamble things. One is the writing of the Mahabharata itself was supposed to be to help a person to reflect off the story, right? So it's a kind of, it's called the fifth Veda in some traditions. It's not supposed to be read as a story out there. Yeah. So when I read the Mahabharata, can I reflect back and ask myself, how am I like this person? Where is, like, you know, if you look at the Mahabharata as archetypal instead of stereotypical, then it takes on a whole different color. So if you take the 5 Pandavas, who are the key players, the whole story is related to that, right? And you have the exact opposites in the Kauravas. It's an extremely beautifully crafted story. And every human situation is represented there, right? So if I take it as an archetype, then I can see those reflected in me. That's the first very important thing, right? The second is that the meaning of the word dharma that you find in the Mahabharata is a very simple meaning. Yeah, you'll find many dialogues in the Mahabharata where the person is just asking a fundamental question: how do I act in a way that I enliven myself, I enliven my immediate context, and I enliven the world I'm in? Right? And some of these dialogues are brilliant. Okay, the first very important dialogue that comes is in a event in a context called the Bakasura Padam. Right, where there's a family, the family has to send one person to Bakasura, Bakasura will eat him up, whatever. So it's always a life and death situation where these dharmic situations are analyzed. So the father starts talking about, what will I do? How will what I do? If I sacrifice myself, what will happen to me? What will happen to you? What will happen to the context? Like that. And each of the dialogues has 4 parts that are discussed. What would be a dharmic action? What would be adharma? What is apad dharma? There's a difficult situation. What is apad dharma? And what is the human context? I, as a human being, I feel this, I feel that. How am I to relate to this context? Right? So this is another very beautiful way of looking at dharma. So the basic question is very simple. So for any person in any situation, whether it's a leadership situation, home situation, whatever it is, right? And that was Dinesh's challenge to us. Now, can each of us here be alive to the context, to each other and to ourselves, right? So every time I act like that, I'm dharmic. And then if you look at many critical incidents in the Mahabharata, it is a contrast between a choice which is a dharmic possibility and a choice that is adharma. And it's not as though the Pandavas are always making the correct choice. Whenever they make a mistake, like Prasad was saying, they're willing to accept, I made a mistake. They go back and study. Those are the Vanavasa periods are all times when they go back into deep introspection. And the Mahabharata will discuss how some sage will come. He will talk to Yudhishthira. Yudhishthira will say, I'm suffering like this. He'll say, don't worry. You know, this is the story of Nala and Damayanti. This is what happened to them. Can you reflect on that and learn? Right? So this is the whole context of the Mahabharata. And every one of us needs to do that. We have to get up in the morning, go out into the world and experience the world with whatever knowledge and capability we have. And we have to ask Dinesh's question, in doing what I'm doing, what am I really doing? How am I bringing on what is happening to me? That's a key question that comes up in the Mahabharata in different ways. And then I come back home and I do my own Vanavasa. I sit quietly, reflect. And if I use the Mahabharata, it helps me to reflect. Yeah, have I been a Yudhishthira in a Bhima context? So at a very simple level, it will help you. At a profound level, it will help you. And then if you learn to listen to your silence inside, you can have your own private conversation with the Krishna within you. Right? So whenever you have a Dharma Sankata, you've learned how to converse, you'll go within. And your own Krishna is always waiting and ready to talk to you. Yeah, I've taken many people through it. Right now, there's a group of people who are into grassroots development and leadership. And we've taken them through the Mahabharata thing, you know, enacting it and all that. Such profound insights, no? Just happen. So it's not a book to be read like a storybook. It's a mirror to the self.
Thank you. Prasad, the question that I had for you was, you have been doing a lot of work in Vedanta. Adding on to what Raghu said and also bringing in the lens of Vedanta, what would you want to see this conscious leadership as?
Thank you, Anil. What comes to my mind when you say whether it is, of course, I'm aware that some of you who are watching might not have Indian background, might not know what Mahabharata is, Pandavas and Kauravas or Vedanta, some of them. I appreciate it. And please, I recommend, if you are not able to follow what it is, just Google Mahabharata and look at Wikipedia and look at some of that. You will get a lot more context. First. Second, see, the Vedanta is the, you might call the philosophical underpinning of Dharma, if you want to call it. I would just say a little bit boldly that it is not just the Hindu Dharma that we are talking about, because at one time, when the Dharma was contextualized or Vedanta was contextualized, the differentiation of what we are calling it as multiple religions did not necessarily exist in the way in which we know, and the polarities between them were never necessarily that starkly displayed as well. So in that context, at one time, the philosophical underpinning that pervade the Indian subcontinent was called Sanatana Dharma, the ancient way of living. A certain dharma cannot be translated into English. It's a very poor translation to call it ethics, but it will communicate one part of it. Similarly, philosophy is a poor translation of Vedanta. But what I find is, if we do not translate some of the wisdom of the ages, number one, we need to identify what need to be mined out of the insights from the ancient wisdom like Vedanta. For example, there are 4 principles which I found very, very meaningful. And Raghu, myself, Saiji, many of us, Anil, you and Dinesh, you, we have all been chatting quite a bit about 4 essential principles that might be very connected with the topic today, conscious leadership. What are those 4 principles that we came across that are very meaningful and that need to be brought into leadership domain? One is the word I just used, dharma. If you look at dharma, if you look at the original word in Sanskrit, it comes down to something that upholds whatever is appropriate, whatever is what we call righteousness, whatever makes good things to happen in the world. And there is one invisible underlying foundation for all good things that happen. And that foundation is called dharma. Obviously, you can see why it is also called ethics. And that dharma is the foundation for not only everything we do time eternal, long time ago, but it continues to be right now. As you can see in the current context, when organizations ask people to go back to work, their employees to go back to work 5 days a week instead of 2 or 3 days a week, or work from home, now there is a real rebellion that is brewing around the world. People who always went to work and they had a difficulty to do what you call as an exception for a short time period, people could work from home. Now the entire dharma has changed. Now they see that the companies could make money, companies could survive very well, and the projects and products kept coming no matter whether they worked from home or whether they worked from somewhere else. And now if you ask somebody, like this evening I was sitting in and talking to a lady who was saying she has in Bangalore a 2-hour commute to go from where she lives in the North Bangalore in Matikere to Electronic City. She says, if I have to go 2 hours to go and 2 hours to come back every day, I first said, I will do very strictly 8 to 5, first of all, or whatever. My productivity is going to drop, if not 1/3, at least it will drop by half. And I'm seriously going to start looking at whether I can find a job that is nearby to my home. Because at this moment, I'm not in a situation to change my home to where Electronic City is. So what is the dharma in that context? Now, for her, the dharma might not be the same as what is for the company. So we need to look at balancing the individual dharma that works for an individual versus what works for the organization. Similarly, if we extend that metaphor, what works for an organization, what works for the industry, and then let us take it to the largest context, what works for the industry has to work for the ecosystem in which we live in. That is where the climate change, that is where the economic value proposition versus the environmental value proposition, how what we are doing consciously or unconsciously for the jobs that is affecting the water systems to, like for example, in California where I live, we had, for a long time there was no rain. For past 1 month, I had my right side of the fence fell off, and then the left side of the fence fell off. The back side of the fence fell off. We had no electricity for one whole day. And my colleague in Saratoga was telling me for 4 days, it never happened in the 40 years that they lived. 4 days, they had no electricity at all. So what is Dharma? And whose Dharma is it that we are following? So the Vedanta asks a question, what point of view are you taking when you say this is good for me? When it is good for you, is it good for others, good for all? If it is not loka kalyana prapyatam, for the good of the world, whatever you do will pay off less and less and less with more and more and more time you spend on it. That is one Dharma interpretation. So a conscious leader will pay a lot of attention to the dharmic principle that will work for not only their benefit for this quarter, but also for their employees, but their customers, and also the ecosystem in which that leader is operating in. That is one direct application of Vedanta. I'll just quickly go through, I will not detail them like I do. The second principle I talk about, and actually this is not what I came up with, but Saiji, myself, and Raghu have been thinking about, and then we have been looking at. The second concept we talk about is the Purnatvam, means wholeness. If I talk to you, by the way, you probably are very familiar with strength-based leadership, strength-based management. Dinesh and I talked at length, like whenever I felt very jealous about Dinesh several times when we go into workshop, because he opens his heart and he starts singing wherever we go in Hindi songs, which I don't understand very well, but I love the music anyway. Or when he does the workshops, people are dancing and singing and playing, and there is suddenly there is so much of joy. Whereas when I go and give profound, deep, nice bullet points and give some great stuff in my talks, people say, this is too much of intellectual stuff. I know what I'm saying is important, but then I realized, when I was talking to Dinesh one day, he told me, brother, I love what you do because you communicate some difficult thoughts in a very simple way, whereas I connect them to their hearts. And I do soul work and you do mind work, but we need to work together so that people operate with both of them. That is Purnatvam. I looked at it like what is missing for me. Dinesh looked at it as what is something that is possible when we bring it together. 1 + 1 just not only is synergistic, as Buckminster Fuller said, as 3, but as in Kashmir, people talk about 1 + 1 is actually 11. It actually takes us into a whole new dimension. So Purnatvam is thinking from the whole, thinking from what is present, but we are not able to leverage, rather than what is missing and going after what is missing there. The third concept, which is extremely well connected with Dharma and Purnatvam, is called Tattvam. What is your true nature? These days, there is a lot of people who are asking, a lot of companies who are asking, purpose-based leadership. What is your purpose? What is your true purpose in life? What is the meaning of life? This has become much more important for Gen Zers, millennials, baby boomers, all of them, because some level we have a lot of understanding, but we don't find the meaning in what we do. So to a certain extent, Tattvam means, who are you really? You are the spirit with a human body, or are you a human body struggling to find your spirit? There is a big difference. When I know that I am the spirit manifesting through everything I do, there is a certain joy, there is a certain equanimity, there is a certain consciousness that pervades through all my leadership or followership. And the fourth one that becomes completion for all of this is the Anandam. Anandam, sometimes people can consider it as joy. Yes, joy is one version of Anandam. Bliss is another version of Anandam. Joy, happiness is another version of Anandam. Like these days, everybody is talking about happiness at work, but happiness is only one small element of it. Anandam means when I am happy, like for example, this is not just Anandam is not just a Vedantic concept coming from Hindu context alone. When you talk about African world, they say, when you are happy, I am happy. Ubuntu, they talk about concept. So there are lots of things. But for me, these four idea of what is your dharma that you are practicing as a conscious leader, and are you operating from wholeness or are you operating from emptiness? Because the psychological trauma and the psychological context you create is very different. Third, who are you really? When, like Raghu asked a question a little while ago when he was talking about Mahabharata, when you do what you do, what are you really doing? When you say you are a leader, who are you really being? Have you become conscious of what is your intention behind your action? That is where you discover your tattvam. And finally, whatever you do it with joy and do it to bring more happiness and do it with a certain sense that whatever I do, I'm doing it because I feel good and I like to do it and I want to do it. From that state of happiness, whatever you do, you bring quality, you bring innovation, and you bring creativity. I think these are some of the fundamental tenets of conscious leadership. I believe they're essential, not just because we are talking from a Vedantic perspective to Hindu leaders or Indian leaders. It's actually, these are the principles that can apply to global leaders anywhere else. It doesn't matter whether they know the words that we are using or not. We are very familiar with Kaizen and the words from Japanese. We need to adopt these Sanskrit words and begin to look at it and say, am I operating from these four directions? If we can bring that, I have a feeling we can do a lot of good, not only to us, but also to our people and organizations.
Thank you. That was very, very comprehensive, Prasad, and very useful. So even before I go to Dinesh for a question I have, it's an invitation to all the participants to start putting their questions because in a few minutes, we will start an interactive question and answer. So please, in the Q&A section, post whatever questions you may have at this time and continue to post them as we go along. So Dinesh, last 2 years, I knew you only virtually, but last 2 days, I've had the opportunity to know you in person as you stay at my home. And you embody love and wellness and well-being and in your work, in your being. So what is it about conscious leadership and wellness and love that you want to speak about or share with the audience today?
First of all, thank you, Prasad and Raghu, for a wonderful summary of both Vedantic and Dharmic principles. For me, at the end of life, most people have one question. Have I led a life which was happy and healthy? People want good health until the last breath. And what I've realized that it's not that difficult. If we can pay attention, if we hold the intention to lead a healthy life, then it is possible. And there are lots and lots of ideas which people have, and we all have, of how to lead a life of wellness. But the issue comes in that how do we adopt the habits? That's where I find a real challenge is in terms of how do we adopt those habits that lead to well-being. And I feel that the conscious leaders have figured out a way to not only inspire their own self, but also inspire others who are coming in contact with them to adopt new habits. One leader which comes to mind is recently Anil Gupta. He's an IITian and he lives in Kanpur. And I was born in Kanpur, and I always wanted to work in my lane to clean up the city. And I used to show people the pictures of a nice European cities and a small lanes, but beautiful and flowers. And I did not get much success. Right after my college days, I wanted to clean up my lane and didn't have much success. Now, here is Anil Gupta. He has been trying for last 10 years. He never gave up. He kept at it, and is beginning to make a dent. And now I find that finally there are lanes which are shining. The most important, people are now inspired and their attitude is changing. The other thing I find that in addition to persistence, the leader I consider conscious operate from amazing amount of humility. And once you kind of begin to detach, once you begin to accept the situation and you are committed to doing your best, then the detachment becomes normal. And an amazing and the most important requirement, I think, for a conscious leader is a sense of surrender. And that is such a intellectual proposition. We all learn that when we go to temples. I remember at a young age, Sashtanga Dandavat. You have to go and lie down in a temple and say, okay, I'm surrendering here. And I used to wonder, what am I surrendering? And as Prasad, me and my wife, Indy, 3 of us were lost in Mount Dana last June 30th. And that was an amazing experience for me because that night I thought I was not going to live. Some of that was, of course, exaggeration and fear. And then some of them was real because at Mount Dana, which is in Yosemite Park, 10,000 feet, and night, no clothing, running out of food, water, and not knowing what temperature will get at night, and fear of bear. And I could hear the snakes rattling. And we had to settle down on a piece of rock and waited for some help to come. In that moment, my wife said, okay, guys, we have to spend the night here. And she almost appeared like Durga at that time. And she said, let's say a prayer. So that gave me a little bit of courage. And I said, okay. So she said a prayer, I said a prayer, and then Prasad, 3 of us said a prayer. And we kind of settled down to see what happens. In that moment of surrender, the idea, which was kind of an intellectual idea for me for all my life, suddenly became a real possibility and embodiment of that idea. So every time I begin to say a little bit of I, suddenly that memory comes back at the cellular level, and I go back into that sense of surrender. So that has been very, very powerful experience. And now I relate that to Anil Gupta. I find that he lives in that state of surrender all the time. So I find that conscious leaders have humility, acceptance of situation, and this sense of surrender, which brings detachment from the outcome. So that makes them very, very effective and very, very persistent. They never give up. And so 10 years later now, Kanpur Parivartan Forum is making a dent. And I just bring one example. There are thousands of leaders around the globe who are working like that. And that to me is a conscious leader.
Thank you. So I will begin with some of the questions that have been asked. And while some of them have been answered online, but we'll still bring some of them for live answering because it will go in detail. First, I would actually like to bring in Piyush Malik. Are we able to spotlight and bring the person asking the question into the video, Koti?
Yes, sir, we can.
Can you bring Piyush Malik online?
One moment.
So the Piyush's question is, what plans do you have to bring conscious leadership in corporate America? Piyush, can you turn the video on and ask the question in whatever texture you want to bring to it? You're on mute, Piyush.
Hello, everyone. Great discussion so far. Thank you for doing this. I've already put my detailed comment and question in the chat, so I won't take too much of the time here, but I just want to compliment you all. You guys have collectively have so much wisdom, and I'm just imbibing small part of it. My only question was, how are you going to make a dent in the universe by spreading this wonderful knowledge that you all have to the corporate America, especially corporate America, because there's a lot of challenges right now that I can see, and then of course then the world as well. Thank you.
Looks like my other two colleagues are not yet saying, so I'll take the leap of faith. First, we are looking at, we started it as a Center for Consciousness Studies and Inner Transformation 3 years ago, Piyush. First, we wanted to develop a master's program in executive coaching based on Indic Wisdom. By the way, why are we using the word Indic Wisdom instead of Hindu wisdom, while much of what we are speaking is Hindu wisdom? Two reasons. One is, while I am very grounded and very happy to be a proud Hindu, in being around the world for past 40 years, I learned a lot that some of my Hindu wisdom is amplified by the Buddhist wisdom that I learned, and the Jain wisdom when I had worked with Ramesh Jain and Arun Jain, and there are so many other people, Nirmal Setia and all of them. What I found was they brought a different angle to what it is. They did not diminish my Hinduness, but they enhanced my Indianness. Of course, there are people who try to diminish it, but I found this integrating, including and transcending the other Indic wisdom traditions, and over a period of time, I found this body of knowledge, Indic wisdom knowledge, has got so much of very well thoughtful frame of reference that can be brought into corporations. Actually, for past 40 years, Dinesh and myself and Raghu and Anil, each of us have been doing our own work to bring it, except, as you rightly say, the time is right at this moment. India is shining, and Indian people around the world are actually playing very many significant roles in the global and Fortune 500 companies. And the the advantage that we have, that more number of younger people in India is also going to make an impact, and we are going to be economically very important. Because of that, the Indic philosophy, Indic management approaches, Indic way of thinking, we need to translate it from the ways of the monks and the ways of spiritual moksha pursued approaches into practical organizational wisdom and into day-to-day living. That's what is called paramarthika knowledge, to be brought into day-to-day knowledge, if you want to bring it. Okay. To do that, we need to translate it. Otherwise, what happens is, there are so many people in the West who have used the Indian knowledge, Eastern knowledge. They adopted it with their own approach and translated it into their own. And of course, we are upset that they are not giving the credit or they are not necessarily acknowledging the Indic roots. While we can confront and we can look at that source, I also believe the time is right now. We need to take the next step. Take the wisdom, Indian knowledge systems, translate it into management philosophy, management principles and frameworks, compare and contrast with the existing models that came from the West, either from psychological tradition or from different traditions or brain research, and create models that companies and leaders and startup ecosystem can apply directly, no matter whether they belong to India or not, they belong to Hindu system or not, they need to become applicable. So we need to develop tools, we need to develop methods which do not have the religious overtone and for not just for spiritual purpose, for practical purpose. I think that translation, if we do over a period of time, we will develop the intellectual knowledge and capability. I think for that, there are not that many people who have come together and doing it. So we are creating the Institute of Indic Wisdom. We are actually launching it in a big way when we are ready. Right now, we are getting people like you, academics, and other people to work together so that we can create new papers, professional papers, academic papers, conferences, and books by comparing and contrasting. We are not saying the existing models are bad. We are saying along with that, we need to provide a holistic, like a Purnam, we said, no, we need to develop holistic and more meaningful approaches to deal with the trauma that the people are going through, to deal with the poly crisis the companies are going through. I think we can need new solutions and new methodologies to stand beside the existing models that will help us and the organizational leaders, political leaders, and business leaders to become more meaningful and become more effective in doing so. So that's what we want to do. And we have a lot of work to do to translate some of it into tools and technologies and intellectual property and methods and models. So we are going to be taking it into the world as much as we can. And so anyway, you have ideas and you want to work with us, please let us know and let us do it together. Because I think the future is to create this kind of a collective consciousness-based work to be done, because world is asking for it, and let us contribute to it rather than just complaining about somebody else doing it. That is what is our more motive. They are doing wonderful stuff. Complaining is necessary, protection is necessary, but along with that, new creation, new creativity, new development is what we are focusing on.
Great. I'll just add here that you guys have this wisdom, and I call this as the Gen W, who are able to give back because of the amount of experience you've gained, but also because of the state of mind as well as state of life you all are in. And I'll just do a small plug for the organization I lead here, American Society of Engineers of Indian Origin. And most engineers are logical thinkers. But if you put logic in and combine that with the Indic wisdom from a young age itself, and that's what we do programs for the youth, and get them exposed to Indic way of life, get them prepared for the leadership positions of tomorrow, I think we'll be in a better position. So happy to collaborate, and I'll tell you more. If you are still in the Silicon Valley sometime, would love to catch up with you over a cup of tea. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Piyush, for asking the question. Koti, can you now bring in Rajan Gupta? And thank you, Piyush, for being with us. So Rajan's question is, how does the conscious business leader deal with corruption in his business environment? And as Koti brings him in, Raghu, I would invite you to reflect on that question. Rajan, you are there?
Sure. Yeah, where is Rajan? We'll
Koti,
wait
can
for Rajan. So we also have a little time to gulp that question down and see how to answer it.
Yes. A powerful question.
Yeah, let me let me take a shot at it, and then I'd love to have Dinesh and Prasad come in and help me as I'm struggling with the answer. Yeah,
Can we see you?
yeah.
So, Raghu, while you are struggling with the answer, I just want to add one comment. I
Yeah.
feel that there are a lot of questions about what a conscious leader should do and what conscious leadership is all about. I feel that our role here is to convene, to invite people who are attracted to the word conscious leadership. And I think each person has to answer that question for themselves. It's not that we are going to provide answers. I think consciousness, each person has their own meaning and own experience. And same thing with conscious leadership. I feel that everybody here and all the participants, what are your feelings about conscious leadership? So what do you think? And there is no right or wrong answer here. Whatever you are thinking, that is the right answer, and that is the way you are going to try it, and that's where you're going to find it. So dealing with corruption, same thing comes. What do you feel is your dharma? And when you're dealing with corruption, and the wonderful question, for example, I always reflect on, what is it that I am doing inside me which is corrupt? And why am I able to see corruption outside there? What is corrupt about me? And how can I work on that corruption which is inside me? And as I work on my corruption, whether in terms of relationship or maintaining integrity or meeting my commitments to other people, it appears that corruption is in many forms. Then I think I'm working towards that, towards resolving that. So our purpose here is to provide that space. We are holding that space where all the people interested in this word conscious leadership, they are here to share, and we are here to learn as much as anyone else. So I don't think here we are here to spread wisdom and others to receive. I think here we are here to learn mutually from each other.
Thanks, Dinesh. Rajan, are you able to put on your video and audio and maybe add texture to that question?
Yes, here I am.
So maybe if you could ask the question in a way that...
No, the question is clear, no?
Yeah, if I may add to what Dinesh has said, I fully appreciate what he's saying, that it is a question each one of us have to ask. But I think if we are trying to lead a kind of a discourse on conscious leadership, at least I would expect each one of us, and whosoever wants to, of course, freedom, how he or she has tried to deal with corruption. And I'm talking, I know personal corruption is a meaningful thing, but I want to kind of raise the bar. I want to raise the bar from that, because I think some of the panelists and some of the other attendees have been CEOs and held very high positions in India and in US at least. And I believe corruption is everywhere. And by corruption, I mean, let me put it, as the definition given for conscious leadership or the dharmic leadership as Prasad explained. Environment, for example, environment. I don't know if there is any, oil company executive around here or what is happening. I mean, it is every industry. Today we are talking about the ethical issues in software industry. We are talking, so I mean, I hope some of us can feel open enough and feel vulnerable enough, as was mentioned, to share what was the struggle. Otherwise, how will people who are struggling with it, how will they get inspired by this whole idea of conscious leadership? Unless we can, as Raghu rightly said, it's a struggle each one of us goes through. But as a community, we need to bring out our struggles in dealing with tough questions, only then we can take forward this wonderful idea.
Very well said, Rajan and Dr. Rajan. This is the extremely important question you are raising. And only thing I can think about is we are attracted to corruption in certain environments, in a particular culture, in a particular context. But if we put us out of this context, corruption becomes less important. So what it means is corruption is not an individual issue, but as you rightly say, it's in a conscious leadership context. What is it that allows us to be corrupt and accept that corruption? Now, for example, living in the United States, many times when people say, oh, India is corrupt, or Africa is corrupt, or Bangladesh is corrupt, then I ask them, what do you call lobbying? Is it an organized corruption? Is it a legitimized corruption? Isn't that what we, you say that there is a corruption in other parts of the world, but isn't that when some parts of, the industry, or you might call the Congress, or you might call the entire, like if a leader in a Senate holds up the movement towards the entire United States, moving for a non-coal based, or a non-fossil fuel kind of industry, electrical or something else you want to go, one person can say, nope, it can't be done unless you support my state, whether it is West Virginia, or if it is oil, if it is a Texas or something else. So the key part it comes down to is corruption shows up in many forms, in many ways, in many cultures. Question is, when we name it as corruption, it becomes individual and local. When we call it lobbying, it becomes structural and organizational. So what we may have to begin to come up with is, how do I address the environment around me or the context around me in a way that there is a ethical basis for me to do what I need to do, even if some things don't work. But many of us don't have that patience. But some people do. There are examples of, for example, the specific thing like in Infosys, they used to say, like Narayana Murthy or some of them, we will not pay bribes. Or in Aisha, Anil Sachdev used to say, Vikram Lal and some of them say, actually there was a guy, KK, he came to our program in Vrindavan Gardens, and he needed to come into Vrindavan Gardens because we were doing a program there. But the guard there asked for a bribe. But this gentleman said, I am from Aisha, I do not pay bribes. I do not grease your palms. He sat there from 10 o'clock to 12 o'clock till the shift changed, and that fellow went away, and then he came in. And then when we asked, why are you late? He said, well, this is what has happened. I had to choose between sticking with my principle versus missing your class. And then I decided I have lived with this principle for so long, it is worth staying a little longer with it. That happened 31 years ago. I still remember it because that was a statement of demonstrating conscious leadership, of making a choice with my actions rather than with my words. When each of us can see one small area where I am aware and awake and am able to take a stand towards it, I have a feeling we may not change the entire environment, but our life lights up very differently, and other people will operate around us with that light as a guidance rather than putting us in the same box as anybody else. I think that is the way in which each of us can show conscious leadership, one step at a time and in one moment at a time. That's what that comes to my mind when you inspired me. And thank you for asking that.
Thank you, Prasad. Thank you so much. I was reminded of, we were together in that Goa conference.
Yes.
And I did not know it was such an important event in your life. It's so nice to hear about your turning point in that conference. I remember we walking together on the beach.
You were an important part in my life and I missed you, Rajan. I'm looking forward to reconnecting and spending more time with you.
Oh, it is such a wonderful thing. I'm able to participate in some of these online meetings. It's so wonderful, so wonderful. Thank you.
Raghu, did you have anything to add?
I have a slightly different perspective, and I'll bring in a personal dilemma. Yeah, because the Dharma Sankata situations are the key to leadership. Now, why, Rajan? It's all for you, Rajan, that I'm
Rajan,
speaking.
Can you bring back Rajan in?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is still on the same subject.
Yeah. So I remember a couple of small stories. The story is when I was, I used to have this big Enfield bike that I loved. So I, driving all over, whatever. And then, just outside our factory was a crossing. There's this policeman who'll say, hello, how are you, whatever. So every time he salutes, you know why he's saluting you. So I stopped the bike and I started talking to him one day. I said, hey, what is this? Yeah, why are you asking for a little bit of money on this side? So he told me something that really touched my heart. He said, look, the pay commission hasn't changed from some 1940 or something like this. This is how much I earn. This is the life I lead. And there are other structures here and things like this, right? So this is how much I'm suffering. If you feel like helping me, you help me, right? So every time I stop, I would take some money and give it to him. I don't know whether this is corruption or this is a response to a very difficult human situation.
Beautiful.
And there are other situations where in the government offices and all that, I've gone and said no bribe and paid very heavy price for it and so on. So I've kind of, I work on my subjective sense at that point, right? And also, there is a price that a lot of people pay when, as a leader, you take these harsh stances. And it helps if all of them are with you. Yeah. So there are, all of these considerations. And so I really don't know. And my own feeling is the system itself. Yeah, I'm fresh from talking to people at the grassroots yesterday. Yeah, and the kind of systemic and structural imbalances that we have all over the world. And you see the effects of that. It's incredible. So by just belonging to the system, am I corrupt? At one level, I am. So the system is based on acquisitive principles. So how do I, balance these two? How do I work in the system? How do I change the system? Yeah, what are the scaffoldings that we can bring so that the current system can morph into a more dharmic system? So I think most people know what is dharma. It's not that they don't. Yeah, but there are so many life situations that force them to be this way or that way. So these days, when I see what is called small corruption, actually my heart goes out to these guys and I say, okay, you want $20, take it. I know he's overcharging me. I'm not going to fight with the auto driver who's charging me 5 rupees more. right? So maybe I'm assuaging my own guilt in belonging to the system and being privileged. I don't know.
Yes, Raghu, I agree with you. It's so beautiful. Only thing I would like to add is, since it's, I have been associated, I was active in your initial starting, and I was glad your group is doing such wonderful work. I think, you see, one of the things which was talked about when Dharma was talked about, one can talk about individual Dharma, one can talk about group Dharma, one can talk about company Dharma, and goes up to Yug Dharma and things like that. I think difficult questions arise on the boundary when a senior leader is struggling with the personal thing is possible. I think each one of us, I'm sure anybody who's attending this webinar is definitely conscious to some extent at the individual level. I think the serious dilemmas arise when it comes to company level, organization level. Sometimes when upholding a certain, what is environmentally the dharma and what is happening to your company and the employees, jobs and all. I think it must be, I'm sure you people are thinking about it. It would be a great idea to really collect instances of various levels of dilemmas and to help people appreciate the possibilities, as you indicated, as Dinesh indicated. There are alternatives, but there is not, Guru Charan Das's book, Difficulty of Being Good, which is also based on Mahabharata. I think that's an idea which is integral part of evolving conscious leadership. So it was a genuine question. It's not a challenge of any kind. That we need to work on this. We need to develop cases, material, and arguments for it, and instances of exemplary instances, inspiring examples. I've myself been inspired by Asher work. I always used to give that as an example in my class. One organization which upheld a certain level of these principles. So it's just an humble kind of this. My question is an humble offering to this community, and that's all. I think somebody else may have questions or comments. Thank you so much, Raghu and Prasad and Dinesh.
Thank you so much, Rajanji. We are nearing the top of the hour.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for the enriching interaction. Any last words, Prasad, Dinesh, Raghu?
Well, I have been in India now for about a week, and I have met several leaders, including Deepak Parekh at SDFC, and Subramaniam from L&T, and my Aisha group. And I find tremendous excitement about the topic and wellness, well-being. And so I feel that if we can continue this conversation going in the corporate world and continue to ask leaders. So in every single meeting, I ask leaders, what is your take on well-being of employees? What are your thoughts on what can be done? And I was amazed with beautiful answers, lovely answers. So I continue to do this, just asking the leaders, business leaders, of what are your views about caring for employees and well-being of employees and conscious leadership. So that is my take. That's what I'm continuing to do, and work with those organizations which are interested in bringing this kind of corporate culture with these kind of leadership. So that's my thought.
Thank you. Thank you. So we have run out of time. Really want to thank all the panel members, Prasad, Dinesh, Raghu, and all the participants, 50+ participants who have stayed till the end, and the interactions that we have had. and request the Indica team to ensure that the questions are captured, so those we could not take up can also be taken up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anil.